BBC News.
Well, let's get some more now on the age discrimination case brought by the former presenter of the BBC's Countryfile programme, Miriam O'Reilly. Well, she lost her job when the show moved to a prime time slot, and today an employment tribunal upheld the case on grounds of ageism. Speaking in a news conference this afternoon, Miriam O'Reilly said she felt it was right to take on the BBC.
It was hard to take on the BBC because I love the BBC. I loved working there. I think it's one of the best broadcast organisations in the world. But I felt that I was treated badly because of my age, and standing up to the BBC was the right thing to do, however hurtful, however stressful it has been.
Miriam O'Reilly talking about taking on the BBC. Well, the BBC's creative director Alan Yentob admitted the corporation had got it wrong, and he said lessons would be learned.
We have accepted the judgment of the tribunal, and we would like to apologise to Miriam, and we will be talking to her personally. We are absolutely committed in the BBC to fair selection, and we accept that in this case we didn't get it right. So as a consequence of that, we will be looking hard at training, especially senior editorial executives, about recruitment in this way. We'll be reviewing our guidelines so that people feel that they get the help and assistance that they require.
Alan Yentob. Well, let's talk more about this. In a moment, we'll be speaking to the media consultant Steve Hewlett and PR manager Richard Hillgrove. First, though, let's speak to Gloria Hunniford, who's fronting the BBC primetime show Rip Off Britain alongside Angela Rippon and Jenny Bond. She's worked in the industry for more than 30 years and she joins us now on the line for us. Thank you for joining us,
Good
Gloria.
Evening, pleasure.
Tell us what you think about this case, then.
Well, I first of all admire Miriam very much for having the strength of her own convictions to stand up for what she believes, and of course in the end it was all justified and she got her apology. So I think it was brave of her to, to battle that for over a year, and I'm glad she won it. However, I can only speak as I find, and I have to say it'd be wrong to accuse, I think, the BBC of total ageism. You only have to look at something like The One Show. You have reporters there, they're in their 80s. And the reality is that it isn't all about young people. It's a very broad mix of people who are watching, particularly at certain times of the day. The public want a breadth of age. They want, you would expect me to say this anyway, but they want experience and they want a bit of credibility. And that's why, in a strange quirk of fate, Angela, Jenny and myself made a programme called Rip Off Britain about consumer affairs, which was made for the morning. It wiped everything off the slate, so much so that it went to prime time, which was as much of a surprise to us as anything else. So you never know.
OK, well, stay with us, Gloria. We'll bring in Steve Hewlett, who's a media consultant, with me in the studio. And we can also bring in Richard Hillgrove, who's a PR manager for TV personalities, including the Dragon's Den judge, James Caan. He's in our studio in Bristol. Steve Hewlett, you were sort of making noises as you were listening to Gloria Hunniford. What were you thinking about?
Well, look, who's to disagree? Miriam O'Reilly, has done something that's very hard for someone in her position to do. I think it's worth pointing out that the BBC have lost this, in a sense, by default. They've lost it by default because whenever Miriam O'Reilly alleged that she had been discriminated against on grounds of age, the BBC produced arguments which the tribunal found to be utterly groundless. So the BBC they kept saying that they were seeking new presenters who had these abilities and this criteria and this, and then they produced presenters who didn't have any of it, or some of them didn't. So wherever the BBC were pressed to demonstrate that they had gone through any form of rigorous process, their arguments fell apart. So
what are you saying? You think the BBC has kind of been unfairly tarred over?
No, not at all. I think there's the BBC people at the tribunal kept saying, well, this is just the way things happen in television. Yeah. The fact is, in television, decisions are made by channel controllers and others, who have kind of absolute power. They're almost like medieval sort of potentates. What they say goes. No one gainsays them. Everyone laughs at their jokes and says, yes, sir, no, sir, thank you very much, sir. And they sort of get what they want.
Excuse me. You can't have a situation where employment tribunals are telling the BBC what to do. There should be editorial freedom completely, and this is an absolutely ludicrous decision, and it sets a very, very dangerous precedent moving forward. I think everyone knows that.
I think that's just wrong. They're not telling the BBC what to do. What they're saying is, if you say that you're going to change the presenters in order to appeal to a younger audience, you better demonstrate that there is some evidence that those two things are connected. And in this case,
Crime Watch.
In other words, the BBC are perfectly entitled to say we want to change the programme, we want to change the presenters, and they're even entitled to say,
they absolutely do not need to prove that to an employment tribunal. Employment tribunal should have nothing to do with creative decision-making and editorial freedom whatsoever, and it's a very, very dangerous precedent.
Oh, sorry.
Richard Hillgrove, I mean, you're basically saying it set a dangerous precedent. Do you think then this does skew the power towards presenters? It will make it more difficult for TV executives to decide that they want to make changes
I hope not, because the way this happened, there was a faux pas made by the senior executives. If it wasn't said and it was done and it was unspoken, it would be absolutely fine. Nick Robinson went quietly. They wanted to freshen it up. It wasn't a sexism thing. It's not an ageism thing. People are allowed to make editorial judgment calls on how people look on screen because it's all about appearances, and that's how it works on television.
All about appearances. So if that extends to age, then you think, does that come under that umbrella? Should somebody go because they're looking a little bit too wrinkly for a primetime audience?
Well, you see, I personally don't think it is all about appearance all of the time. I think it's about experience and the aptitude for the job and the type of programme it is.
Correct.
And for example, I'm talking about a consumer affairs programme that I'm involved in. If you had 3 19-year-olds doing it, the credibility wouldn't be there as far as the public is concerned.
It's all got to do with who gets to decide. And when you get the tail wagging the dog like this, you can have a situation where no one can make decisions.
I think this is a slightly daft argument. It's not the tail wagging the dog. The BBC said they were doing something in a particular way according to particular criteria, which in fact they weren't. When somebody said, hang on a minute, what are those criteria? Their argument fell apart. No one is saying that the BBC can't change presenters, refresh programmes, and even replace older presenters with younger presenters. They just have to have a rationale for doing it that amounts to more than, I just think I've had enough of older people.
So if they had said here, well, actually, we did decide that we think younger presenters would attract a younger audience.
Yes.
Would that?
Well, because what the tribunal said is that they were presented with no evidence at all to demonstrate that those two facts were connected.
Why are we having a debate with a tribunal about a creative decision making?
Well, because somebody look, I readily accept that television presenting is not like working in a bank. It is different, and nobody should go into presenting television without understanding that at some point their face might not fit. So, of course, creative freedom has to be paramount. But in this case, there was a sort of... the tribunal remained entirely unconvinced by any of the arguments the BBC made, and they chose to make them for why they made the decision and how.
That's the point. Why are we having this debate? There shouldn't have to be a debate. They shouldn't have to be answering to an employment tribunal. It's opening a massive, massive can of worms.
But I mean, there are obviously discrimination laws in this country, and if a presenter feels that they have been unfairly discriminated against, it's right, isn't it, that they should be able to actually take that employer to task?
Absolutely not. Who are you asking the question to?
Sorry, I'm asking it back to you.
May I leap in?
Yep, sure. Go ahead.
The other reality is, as somebody earlier today said, it is about show business to an extent. And I think that if you want to stay in the business, certainly to have longevity, you have to be realistic at the same time to know that your face isn't always going to fit prime time Friday and Saturday night. You have to branch out and learn to go with the business.
So do you feel that at any stages in your career you were subject to what some people might term ageism? There was maybe something you wanted to do which bosses didn't feel you could do because of your age?
60. I've been in the business in 1969 in Northern Ireland. I'm touching wood as I say this. I've never been out of a job and I've never had to look for one.
I think the main issue with this whole debate is a sociological issue as to women are allowed, women should be younger on television because we prefer to look at younger women. Game show hosts, assistants should be young women, and men get to stay on television a lot longer.
So, I mean, what are you basing that assertion on, though, when you say we prefer to look at younger women on television? Who prefers to look at younger women? And does it then attract a younger audience? Because that seems to be what TV execs are constantly striving for.
I think there's a massive pressure on advertisers, particularly want to target a young audience, and they want people to reflect the audience they're targeting clearly. BBC's not in that position. It's a sociological debate. For employment law to enter that debate and start forcing, you have a situation where women are forced onto boards of companies, and that's another thing that's happening, and that shouldn't be taking place. You shouldn't be forcing these situations on people.
I mean, there is a question here, and I mean, I don't know. I think to take the point that was made earlier, I think if anything, and this may not be a popular thing to say, but I think generally speaking, this problem is getting slightly better rather than worse. That there is more care taken now over credibility, authenticity, experience, and all the rest of it than there used to be. This particular incident is a bit of a blip, although for the BBC it's a very embarrassing blip, because remember, the same controller, Jay Hunt, who's now gone to Channel 4, was also notable for having dispatched Arlene Phillips in the case. So the issue for the BBC about its employment of and portrayal of older women in particular is a very real one. It can't be dismissed as simply a sociological question, as if that was meant it was irrelevant. So.
How many more of these cases do you think this sets in motion because of this decision?
Well, we're fast running out of time, so I just want to get a final thought from Gloria Honeyford, who is an older woman who is doing very well in television. Do you think that this does strengthen the hand of older women in television?
Well, I mean, I don't think that the whole issue is set out to do exactly that. I go back to my original point to say that it's wrong to assume that the BBC is struck by ageism right across the board. They do have older people women working within the network all the time. I started off by talking about the One Show. You know, they have made a policy, Jay Hunt, whom you mentioned in passing, made a policy of having, you know, older presenters on that program in terms of reporting. So they want to reflect that family image around tea time when you have a broad audience watching. And I go back to that point. It's horses for courses and times of the day.
OK, we're out of time. It's been great to talk to all of you. Gloria Honeyford, Richard Hillgrove and Steve Hewlett. Thank you.
Right, the time